Welcome to another episode of Shattering Glass and Heels. Joining me in today's segment is my dearest friend Gerrick Kennedy, culture critic and author of Didn't We Almost Have It All? In Defense of Whitney Houston and Parental Discretion is Advised, The Rise of NWA and the Dawn of Gangsta Rap. Hey Gerrick.
Oh, hi, Christine.
Hi. So thanks for jumping on my podcast. It's just Shattering Glass and Heels, but I'm really excited just to be able to sit down and talk to you. So for everyone who doesn't know who you are, maybe if you could just introduce yourself, and in the context of that, maybe tell us as well, what is your most memorable shoe and why?
Okay, so I am Gerrick Kennedy. I'm a cultural critic and author based here in Los Angeles. I have written two books. Did We Almost Have It All? Defense of Whitney Houston, and Parental Discretion is Advised, The Rise of NWA and the Dawn of Gangster Rap. I was a music journalist slash culture critic slash many things for many years, and I've done it at many places. I think a lot of people um, became familiar with me through my time at the Los Angeles Times, which is why I moved to LA many moons ago. But my writing has appeared in GQ, Vanity Fair, Men's Health, Shondaland, NPR, Wall Street Journal. I start to lose count of the list after that.
So
And I'm
exciting.
currently working on my third book. And, the question about memorable shoes is always so interesting for me, largely because one of my biggest, I don't want to call it a vice, but I think it probably is because of the amount of money that I have spent on shoes. But part of it is, sometimes it's out of sheer boredom. I'll just start shopping, like, oh, I want these, or had a hard day at work. I'm gonna go buy a new pair of shoes. Or there was something about shoes versus clothes to me that like always makes you feel really, really, really good. So I am going to cheat and give you two answers. My very first splurge, most money I had ever spent on a shoe, my entire life, well, at that point, when I was a broke intern at the LA Times, was I saved all of this. I had all this scholarship money that I like had saved before I moved out here. And I took a couple of my checks and I would split them because I wanted so badly. Kanye West came out, he did a collaboration with Louis Vuitton. I needed these shoes so badly, and I bought them. And I wore them everywhere, and they were fabulous. And you got all the compliments and all the things. And it's the type where it's the shoe does all the work. The outfit is whatever because you were looking down at the shoe. But that was, younger version of me. As I get older, I really I've fallen into classic looks. So my that's my first memorable, and then my second memorable is the Prada Monolith booth because I just think it is such a classic moment that you can do with any part of how you want to present to the world. It can be fierce, it can be dressed down, it can be super casual. You can wear it with a tech outfit, and just you can give so many looks with that boot. So it is, yeah, it's a two-part answer.
I'm good with the two-part answer. I like the fact that you did like the beginning and the struggle, and then just kind of where you are kind today. And I mean, you and I have known each other for so long, and so it's
Oh,
just
very
really
long
exciting to
time.
me to just even just celebrate the laundry list of places where your writing has appeared, and just I knew you when you were a kid in Cincinnati, and it's just really exciting for us to even have this conversation. So, on that note, I'm gonna stop asking questions
You
and
can turn it over
I'm
to
gonna
me.
let the pro do his job. Which you're like, okay, you're not in control anymore, Christine. So
No, no, yes, and it's so interesting because obviously we are here to talk about writing, and we are here to talk about this book that you have done, Walking in My Shoes, Shattering Glass Ceilings. I do want to ask you this first, and I ask people this. This is my first question always, um, which is the why. Why did you want to do this?
That's a great question. I think I've been sitting with the idea of this book for about 2 years. And I think I was going through sort of discrimination and really trying to understand what I was going through. Because I think when I was going through it, I really thought that it was a personal vendetta, a personal attack. I thought it was something that I just wasn't enough, that there were things about me as an executive that I needed to improve, and that feedback was something that I was internalizing, and that the blockers that were happening to me were because I was just not talented enough, or that I was missing some core skills. It took me a while and took sitting down with a couple people to really understand systemic racism, and that there were all of these different areas that were really causing that. And it was a way for me to just really organize my thoughts and feelings to understand that. And I wrote a small article. That was really what it was, with the intention of having it published, and it actually was going to get published. But because of where I was with what could have been a potential conversation around litigation, around discrimination, my lawyers told me not to publish it. But I sat with this article because I started to see the statistics that were going out there that really showed that 80% of Asian women dropped off, the corporate track for the executive seat in America. And I thought that was such a huge statistic, and it just really weighed on me. And I just thought that no one was talking about this, and it was also the height of AAPI hate. And I just really thought no one's talking about Asian and Asian stories, that I really just had this idea 2 years ago to tell that Asian story, to tell that perspective, to shine a light around a narrative that really did not exist across corporate America. So that was the original intention. But, I'm a creative, and the creative process changes. That, I sat down with the first 3 chapters, which really laid the foundation and the structure of the systemic bias and racism. I got sick around Christmas and this year, and somehow just started writing, not thinking that I was really going to finish the book. I just decided to kind of write. And so the book, the way that it is and how it's shaped and what's being delivered, is completely different from what I had thought about it 2 years ago. And I think for me, and the impetus around wanting to write and wanting to share this, are really pertinent conversations around now and what people are experiencing now that we're out of the pandemic, and we're just in this impetus of change where people don't understand what normal should look like or what that new normal should be. You've got people who are trying to go back to the way things were pre-pandemic and ways of working. It just doesn't work anymore. You can't expect people to go back. And I'm starting to hear the people around me having these conversations, and me myself being bothered by just not having the right answer on what that change could look like for the dimension of women, for the dimension of people of color, right? We're the ones with multi-generational households. We're caregivers. And, we're looking, that flexibility, that working from home did change the narrative for us, right? In terms of microaggressions and racism, but also allowed us the flexibility to be able to have that balance. And so my question really is how do you move forward, right, into this new era with that kind of balance, with really showing up as your authentic self and really still having that humanity aspect of it that was really did not exist in corporate America, right? You wear your 3-piece suits, you've got your facade, you clock in, you clock out. But the pandemic changed that. We invited people literally in our homes, like I'm talking to you in your home. And that has just become the new norm. So to ask people to go back to sitting in a cubicle when you're talking to people across, to have that 9 to 5, and the impact of that means to families and women who are caregivers, and not having that flexibility, and still this idea of these barriers around the lack of representation for diverse women and women within the corporate world. it really lent me to really write this book to challenge these norms, to create this education to the masses of what that means, not just for women, but for women of color, particularly Asian women, which is even more rare in corporate America, and have this discussion, right? Let's have a conversation around what all these means um, as we're starting to redefine what new normal looks like.
I want to sit with that statistic. 80% of Asian women drop out of the corporate track. Well, one, that's an astounding figure, right? But what I am really curious to know from you is, you know, when you have a figure like that over your head, the same way that, you know, me myself as a black queer man knows that there are not going to really be a seat for me anywhere
Yeah.
um in this sort of corporate world. How did you show up as your authentic self while combating the very obvious thing of I am in this world that is built to exclude me?
I think that's an interesting part, right? Because I'm living through it and I'm trying to show up as my authentic self. But the structures in place don't really allow me to do that, right? So, in a way, I'm taking a very daring approach, right? I feel like I'm in a moment of maybe Billie Jean King, right? Deciding, are you going to settle for the dollar figure that you're getting paid right now, or are you going to challenge the social norms and ask for that paycheck and demand for that paycheck, demand for that equality, and give it to the next generation, right? So, like, if you think about what Billie Jean King has even done for tennis and women in tennis, we wouldn't have the Serena Williamses of today if it wasn't for her paving that way. And to some degree, I feel like I've stepped into this responsibility of being one of the few to really shine a light on my experience and these experiences to pave it for the next generation and to really shine a light of what that looks like. Because I think part of really what I also had to internalize, right? Because 80% is a really huge statistic, right? I had to ask the question, why did women drop off? But I'm never going to find that next person to really ask. So I had to ask myself, what's my motivation for pushing forward? Right? Like, you have to ask yourself, like, you know, why fight, right? It feels like the statistic is so heavy. What is my motivation? I think that that's also what I also realized is that for me, the motivation for moving forward is personal, right? As failure is not an option for my survival. That was really kind of where it came from. And when you think about professional athletes, professional artists that you and I know, when you think about what motivates them, there's something completely innate and personal around what drives them. And that's the same thing of what drives me. It's a personal calling to do that. And that's my story. I don't know about the other 80% of why they dropped off or why other keep fighting, but I had to answer that question for myself. And I think that that's my motivation is like, yeah, I am going to fight because I believe so badly in the cause and that kind of representation. I may not see the complete rewards for me today, but someone has to start cracking the glass.
So I'll take a giant step back.
Sure.
Obviously when we first met, um, you were working in a program that, it was ultimately about, mentorship and about, helping um, young minds, see their potential, but also really help execute a pathway toward something as simple, which on paper should be simple, but it's not in reality, which is, getting, um, frankly, getting Black kids into college. I mean, if we could just like say straight up what like that was, and even though, I went to a school that was diverse, it was primarily Black. And remembering, who showed up to, um, those sessions that you led, it was mostly Black students. Um, but separate from that, though, you were also working at Cincinnati Opera, and we got to spend so much time there. And so maybe tell us all how you end up from the world of opera to the corporate world.
Life happens. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's funny that you say that because that's exactly how we met. I was volunteering at your school to help first generation college students get into college. That's how you and I met. And so I think that was actually really, really special. And actually, it was also funny when you think about it. Think about it then, right? Cincinnati was so black and white that the question to me is like, where are you from, or like what high school did you go from? And when I was having these conversations with you guys and making you dream that you could go to any college outside of the state of Ohio or outside of the city of Cincinnati, I got so much resistance. You and I
Mhm.
used to be like, okay, we're going to go apply to these colleges. We're not going to tell anyone, because I believed so much in the power of just plotting your own destiny, and people were hampering that, right? You and I also kind of went through that together. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, you knew that I was at Cincinnati Opera, and I graduated from Oberlin not shortly after you and I met, and the dream was always to be an opera singer. And I never imagined my life in corporate America, but life happened. So I went through a divorce. I was crying too much, and I bruised my vocal cords. And
Mhm.
so the idea of being able to pursue a career in opera at that time was just quite, earth shattering for me, because I just thought it was like a completely career ruining injury. And so it kind of forced me to look inside and say, where do my skills look like in another business that is not center stage. And I hated arts administration so much. I didn't like the idea of fundraising. I didn't like the avenue of arts administration in a nonprofit. That I had to do some digging and kind of found marketing as the great place for creative types like me that could have a good career of balancing that out. And that's kind of where I went. So, and just life just happened. So,
Uh,
I mean, it wasn't like, okay, yeah, I dropped you in marketing. I went to experiential marketing. That was the very beginning of the idea of event marketing and street teams. And I worked for a agency, and my boss was a former concert pianist who called
mhm.
shows and stage managed. She knew that my arts background could easily do experiential marketing and call street shows. She goes, "You can call a show, you can do this." And that's kind of how my life kind of evolved from the marketing agency side. So I never imagined my life in corporate America, but life happens, and here we are. So
As you were navigating, after career change and now stepping into this world, and, that's obviously the first of many reinventions that we are all blessed to be able to do.
yeah,
I think there's something really special about um, the pivot, even though sometimes it gets exhausting. Sometimes it's a pivot out of choice. Sometimes it's a pivot out of survival. There's lots of reasons why there's pivots, right? But within all of that, of course, you start building and you start having not just success, but with that comes, the growth that begins to happen naturally as you are, moving up and you are soaring up, right? So I I would like you to kind of think back to that very first wall that you ran into where you realized, oh, there's either no more for me to go here. And maybe the thought was, maybe it's because I'm a woman. Um, tell me that first thought, because if when I hear you talk about how long it took you to realize, you know, some of the systemic racism that you were up against. I imagine that I imagine that so much of those microaggressions and those things were they were subtle, because I feel like also in corporate America we know how loudly those things are for just women, regardless of race. So I kind of want you to tell me a little bit about that first wall that you came up against, and then how'd you bust through it?
I think there are a couple of different pivots actually that you think about it, right? So let's go back to me not pursuing the performing arts for a second, right?
Uh huh.
Actually, there was a pivot from musical theater to opera. So, when you graduate in your 20s, opera singers are like fine wine, the older the better. And when you graduate in your 20s, your voice is, especially if you're a soprano, your voice is really just not mature enough to be on stage. So, my whole idea after was, I'm going to go sing musical theater. I'm going to do theater because my background is performing arts since I was 5. So to me, there was always a way to figure out how to survive within the context of performing arts. But I remember distinctly that there was a manager on Broadway who basically told me, unless The King and I, Flower Drum Song, or Miss Saigon is going to play at perpetuum on Broadway, you will not have a job. And, let's rewind the clock. That was like in the 90s, like the late 90s. And that was really impactful to me, right? Because I had been performing since I was 5. And the notion within America and Broadway, right? Taking that out of the context of regional Asia, right? Or they were okay about hiring Asian talent to fill in those roles for those big shows, was very different in Broadway, right? You had to actually look the part and look the right color. And the notion of Hamilton was in absentia. So in essence, that agent was right. And so that was the first moment where I was like, okay, I'm not going to make it in Broadway. And he was like, try opera. And I think because it's more around the talent, the voice, the meritocracy of opera that you're going to have a better chance than the look, right? And that was kind of one direction that led me there. So that was one point. Corporate America was longer, right? I think part of it is that you've known me for a really long time. I grew up in a family of really strong women. I never once imagined that my gender or my race were something to be ever questioned, and I just never really walked through that. As I walked my way through corporate America, I just never really, again, thought that there was that impediment. Every time that something went wrong or there was a disagreement, or I just thought it was like a personal chemistry thing, right? That, oh yeah, this person just doesn't really like me. It wasn't until honestly, let's just be honest, it was almost like 3-4 years ago where I started calling you and I was like, this is real. And people really started to show this to me where as I started to climb in my career, and I'm trying to get up to that, level of partner and really into that executive level, that's when it started to feel that pressure of just not making it. My numbers on paper, my performance in comparison to my peers were far more superior than everyone else. And it was but they were handing out the promotions to someone else, not me. And it just didn't make any sense to me why, you wouldn't hand it to me when on paper it was okay. And there was always this carrot that kept dangling. There's always next year. There's always next year. Work harder, work harder. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to work harder. I'm going to change. I'm going to try to strive to be better than I am now. I never really thought about it until, one day there was the one class of promotion class, and there were 5 of us, people of color, and we started to compare notes. We were going through this promotion cycle 3 years in a row, and none of us were getting promoted again. And our numbers really proved that we were in the top right quadrant of performance, and the numbers were better than the previous year. And that was really the first time that I just really started to think, gosh, it's not us. There's something systemic about this. And I think out of that group, there were 2 African Americans. and maybe they're a little bit more well versed in this because of the history within America. And I'm an immigrant, and they really started to give me kind of the language and the ideas to really start to shape this thinking of systemic bias. And when we started to kind of do the investigation and talk to lawyers, and I started to understand that these do exist, that it wasn't me, that there really was a system in place that really put us down, and that there was precedent for it. And that was really disturbing and so disheartening. So at that point, right, you can go down the path of, litigation. But one of my lawyers told me, it's like, the trajectory of your career has already been changed. So what do you want to do? Because the laws will protect you, but once you file, it becomes public record.
Correct.
And that looks negatively on you, because that means that any job that you want to go through is always going to have the stigma, whether you're right or wrong.
Right.
It's there. So what do you want to do? I've gone through 2 divorces, so I was just like, let me just walk away. Let me take care of my heart, my head, and my health and figure it out. But, it has taken so much to really kind of think through all of those different pieces of what that means. And I think I thought that it was going to land in fertile soil. And I think I see through the systemic bias even more clearly now. And I think that's even more amplified during the pandemic. Black Lives Matter, API hate. All the companies are saying this story that they do believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is it a genuine and honest conversation? It's a check mark in compliance. That's the truth. And I've been on the other side in corporate America in a hiring position where I've actually been told that your next hires need to be diversity hires, or that I've actually been told that you're a diversity hire. So it's really hard, right? Or I've also been in positions where I've asked a question around diversity in a company, and their answer is, we were not founded that way. We're not there yet. We want to be there, which is why we're talking to you. It's I think a point where how much of this are we trying to overcorrect? How much of this is a genuine conversation? Because either way, it's actually not a safe situation for anyone of color to walk into. Because now you're going to be put in the spotlight to be in charge of diversity, equity, and inclusion on top of the metrics of your regular job. And it's not like you're additionally compensated for that. And what qualifies you to run diversity, equity, inclusion? Just simply because of the way that you look in your heritage. That seems really unfair, doesn't it?
Yeah. Writing a book like this, of course, and you're very frank about your journey in the book. You're also very respectful in all the things, of course, that I knew you would be, but also because the places don't actually matter, right?
No.
Because it's the experiences and what's so relatable here, unfortunately so, is so many people will be able to connect to this story and these experiences. One that stood out to me. You write about, it's hard for me to think of it is that way, but that's how I think about when you're writing. So much of what I love about hearing people's story and reading people's stories is I do feel like they're speaking to me. You're having a conversation. That's how I look at books, especially books like this where it is someone's personal story. And I like to treat it as a long conversation. And also, obviously, us having a relationship made it very easy as I was reading it. But there's this story you tell about being ignored in a meeting by men, and hearing your ideas presented by the men on your team, and then those being heard. And there is something about the silencing that comes with that, essentially, that on one hand, it's incredibly degrading and hurtful, right? And in the moment, you may not get to feel those things, but you're also it's not that you're told not to, but it's presented to you in a way in which you should not take it personal. And that's what I find so fascinating about, corporate culture, where so many people, because I've been in these scenarios where it's not just men doing it; it's also white women as well. I've had it done to me by lots of different folks, and other people of color as well. Frankly, I have, where hearing it from you is not good enough for me because how I see you is not a person who can deliver or offer me guidance, criticism, feedback, support, anything like that. I'm going to go look to this person. And so when you see them look to a person who also knows this about that person, and so they then know, well, the smart thing to do is, well, let me catch myself. It's not the smart thing. It is the thing that they know will get them the result they need, which is the person hearing the feedback, hearing the comment, hearing the idea. They're getting it done. I know there is a world in which when that person does that, they do not believe that they are participating in degrading their colleague. They believe that, oh, this is just what is needed, or in this case, oh, you know how these guys are. They just, they get really weird with what, there's all these ways that it's explained so that you don't personalize it, so that you don't take it as, this reminder that oftentimes we are not only thought of as not good enough to be in these spaces, but they show that they absolutely cannot fathom why we are in these spaces. And
Yeah.
so then we are not heard because our voices don't actually matter to them, or we are just decoration. There's been plenty of times where I've been pulled into meetings and it's like, I have no reason to be here, but I'm like, oh yeah, they wanted them to see that there's a Black person that's here, or there's a queer person that works here. And, in those moments, we have choices, right? We're playing the game, or we are surviving, or whatever it is. What I would like to know from you, and this is a little spicy of a question. Obviously, you've talked about having to move into litigation and all these things. But I really want to know, when was enough for you? When were you absolutely like, I am no longer going to do this. I can't any longer continue being treated this way.
I think that's the moment of where it is, right? I think that was where the book was, and I, I was sick with bronchitis and all sorts of crazy things, and literally couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, and I was almost like having this PTSD moment when I was writing this, that I was back to dying with COVID, because it was also the same moment, the last moment in my life where I couldn't breathe and I couldn't speak. And I just started writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. And I think within that writing was also just kind of me just saying, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't silence myself anymore. And I think what was so interesting, and you know me, right? The last concert I sang was 2021. The last time I practiced was 2021. And I think that was profound, was that I haven't sung. I haven't really used my voice, and I feel like I've been carrying all this stuff and I've been silenced for so long. I think getting it out on paper and just this release and this healing and being able to really have like my circle of trust as I was really writing this, including you, and processing through this was really the point of empowerment for me, where I think it's symbolic, where I'm finding my voice back and my voice is coming back stronger. And that's exactly what this book is, because to me is enough. Like, I know that in order for me to be successful, I need to be able to show up as my authentic self. And I cannot be the great leader and great manager that I am when I'm being silenced. And or I feel uncomfortable in my skin, or that I'm being made to feel uncomfortable. And so I think it's interesting, right? Where you and I talked about this too, where sometimes within the systems, it's okay for them and it's permissible if they give you the spotlight. But if you own the spotlight and you take the spotlight for yourself on your own merit and it's not given to you, people get angry, people get upset. And I think that there was always kind of this dimension where, you know, there were other aspects of my life and the personality that was really kind of authentic in where it was going, such as the LA Times honor that I got in November, that came out organically from the people who really have supported me and who really do value me as an executive, and people who were just not supportive of that award and just really thought it came out of left field and that they were not part of that nomination and didn't feel that I was deserving. So it was strange, right, to be in that moment as well. And I think that that was one of the moments where, you know, it really just came to me. It's like, enough is enough, right? Enough is enough is enough. And I think part of it is that it's not just my story. It's a story of everyone around me that's experiencing this idea of being silenced, this idea of just, I need to go back to work and I'm really terrified to go back into the office, because being in the virtual world during the pandemic meant less microaggressions. No one made comments about my hair or the smell of my food or had these inappropriateness or this interactions and awkward interactions. And I think there was that kind of level of safety, and just the mental health component, I think, was really what has been bothering people. And I know I'm not the only one, and I think I was just starting to hear all of these stories, and the people around me, my mentees, were really, really struggling with this. And I think, to me, enough is enough, because it's not about me anymore. It's about everyone around me and their voices just, you know, not in the same place where I am that can be amplified. And so, you know, I'm in a position where I can use my voice. I should use my voice. I'm in a position in my life and my career where I can advocate for the people who can't. And I think that's part of the impetus of why I wrote this, and where, to me, enough is enough.
My last question is a two-parter. Um, what did you get out of writing this book? Was it a source of healing? Was it a source of making peace with some of these things you experienced? Did it awaken new things for you? Did it make you resent corporate world more, or love it more, love it less, or whatever? And then also, what do you hope people who pick up this book and read it, what do you hope they take away from it?
So I have nothing against the corporate world. I obviously live in the corporate world. Big fan of enterprise. I think I've just seen within history that there are moments of something calamitous and then change happens and prosperity. And I think we're in that same moment. I talk about this in the book, where enterprise and industry was built with Rockefeller and Vanderbilt and Carnegie. And at that time, there was unregulated monopoly. And when they were building their empires, it was, you know, people were working in unsafe environments, like literally dying. And I think they're in a point right now where, you know, we're challenging all of that, right? And like later in history, people challenge that notion of safety. And Eric comes forward with the idea of a 40-hour work week and a structure and a balance of, you know, labor laws, and then also breaking up, you know, the monopolies with the antitrust. I think we're in the same situation right now, right? It's not so much a life and death situation. It can be, but you know, I think we're challenging the norms of what does safe look like in a dimension of women and diversity, particularly for the BIPOC community. And I think we should challenge that, because it's not, the world is changing, the workforce is changing, and a lot of these structures in old corporations, particularly those that are 100-year-old, need to change. And so I think this book, and the aim for me writing this, is to provide that voice and that education to the side of, the people whose voices are not amplified and heard, but how also where that structure of the workplace and the workforce is changing, and these are the voices that need to be heard. So I think these old structures need to be broken down. They need to be reimagined in order for us to bring in a really good, diverse workforce that actually allows corporate America to be even more profitable than they are today. Nothing is more exciting and more profitable than a room full of diverse ideas and diverse people. And that's what we need to kind of influx that. And this is what the blind sides are in corporate America, and what I really wanted to bring to the table. You asked me about writing the book. I think to me was a moment for me to actually really, again, there's a lot of healing for me, as I start to really kind of process through my own journey. But really, I think to be able to amplify these voices and these thoughts was really the impetus for me to want to publish the book, right? So, I could have just written it for myself, but this was, I think, the courageous moment for me to be able to bring this out in the open, to bring this out to the collective, and to drive this conversation. Because it's not a happily ever after just yet, right? There's not that. This is just the beginning of what change and conversation should look like within corporate America.
Absolutely, I agree. This was so much fun.
Me too.
Such a joy.
Such a joy. Yeah, no. Now I need to go drive to LA now and get oat milk lattes with you.
I know, and I didn't ask you any questions about, late night writing stuff like that, because I know that trauma. So what's the point? But I'm so proud that you are here, that it is done, that you put this story down on paper. Because again, as I said, it's so relatable to all of us who have had to push back or fight against status quo. And it's just, it arrives at a time where, we are having these conversations, especially around corporate commitments to DEI, and how, I think a couple years removed from the great reckoning of 2020, they finally realized, oh, we don't have to actually care anymore about all of you. So those are the first jobs cut. Pretty much everywhere, as we are seeing almost daily now. So yeah, I think this book is arriving at a perfect time for folks to be able to have something to sit with and have those uncomfortable conversations, especially also, considering how many people are reevaluating their relationships to these structures now that we are, 3 years out from the beginning of the pandemic, and we're still moving through it. And we're seeing how these companies are wanting you to pretend that that doesn't exist so that you can come back into this culture and that grind and that hustle. And it's not for everybody.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, right? And I know that we have to go, is that this conversation started for me in corporate America because that's the history and that's the corner of the world that I have. You're a culture critic and you live within the industries of the artists and music. It's the same conversation in the same industry. And I think that is exactly what it is, right? It just different flavors of it in terms of how people are asking for a resolution, for a seat at the table, and that, equity. But it is very pervasive as well in your industry, particularly in the music industry. I mean, we just had the Grammys. So
yes,
I think it's a conversation for now, and I think the BIPOC community really should not be silent. And, so thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.
It's the joy. Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Thank you for listening to my podcast. I hope this has inspired you to continue the fight for equality, challenge stereotypes, and lift as we climb. Amplify the conversation on social media, following at DuquesseCD and DuquesseCD.com. #Shattering Glass in Heels.